close your eyes. Imagine the eternal city, its marble temples glowing under torchlight, the air thick with incense and whispers. Beneath the grandeur, Rome was a world of contradictions, discipline and decadence, brilliance and blood. Its emperors ruled like gods, its citizens indulged like royalty, and its laws could turn from justice to cruelty in the blink of an eye. What you're about to hear are the hidden truths behind Rome's most shocking legends, 12 stories that peel back the gold and reveal the iron underneath. As the night deepens, let these echoes of history guide you through the secret corridors of the Roman mind, the world that built our civilization, but also our darkest fascinations. Now, let's begin where the heart of Rome truly beat, not in the Senate or the palaces, but in the arena. Blood and glory, the true life of the gladiator. To most people, the word gladiator conjures images of men fighting to the death, roaring crowds, and imperial thumbs deciding fate. But the truth, as always in Rome, was far stranger. Gladiators were both slaves and celebrities, property and icons. Contrary to the myths, few battles ended in death. These men were expensive investments. Their owners, called lanistae, trained and maintained them like prized athletes. They were fed special diets rich in barley and beans, so much so that archaeologists nicknamed them barley men. The goal wasn't speed, but bulk fat to cushion sword wounds and blood to entertain. In the training schools known as ludi, discipline was merciless. Disobedience meant lashes, humiliation, or worse. New recruits practiced endlessly with wooden swords until their reflexes became instinct. Their mentors, often ex-gladiators themselves, were masters of both pain and precision. Every movement, every strike, was a blend of choreography and survival. But despite the brutality, many gladiators fought willingly. Some were former soldiers seeking fame, others debtors trying to buy their freedom. The arena was one of the few places in Rome where a man's courage could rewrite his destiny. A string of victories could bring money, adoration, and even liberation. A wooden sword, the rudis, symbolized freedom, the dream of every fighter, and fame they did achieve. Their faces adorned graffiti on city walls. Children played games mimicking their favorite champions. Wealthy women bribed guards to spend a night with them. Some even endorsed products, oil brands, weapon makers, and occasionally love potions. Yet behind the glamour was constant fear. Medical care was advanced. Rome's physicians studied the wounds of fighters to refine surgical tools, but no doctor could protect them from fate. A misstep meant disfigurement, or worse, a final bow before roaring masses. Even women entered the sands. The gladiatresses, female warriors, fought each other in smaller arenas for the amusement of the elite. Their appearances scandalized the Senate, which eventually banned them not out of mercy, but out of embarrassment. For all its cruelty, the arena mirrored Rome itself. Disciplined, theatrical, and obsessed with spectacle. Each drop of blood was a performance, each scream a song of empire. When dawn rose over the Colosseum, the sand was raked smooth again, ready for the next act in this empire's endless show. The madness of Nero, fire, fear, and the fall of an emperor. When the gladiators slept, Rome's true theater began in marble halls where power itself became performance. And no emperor blurred the line between ruler and actor more completely than Nero Claudius Caesar, the young sovereign who believed the world was his stage. Nero ascended the throne at only 17, groomed by his ambitious mother, Agrippina the Younger. She envisioned herself as Rome's invisible empress, ruling through her son's gentle youth. For a time, the empire prospered until Nero discovered something intoxicating: applause. He fancied himself a poet, a musician, a god in human form. And like any artist in a court of daggers, he soon saw everyone as competition. Whispers in the palaces tell of poisoned dinners and silenced counselors. But the most chilling tale came when Nero, weary of his mother's control, plotted her death. First came an accidental collapse of a sabotaged boat meant to drown her. When Agrippina swam ashore, battered but alive, Nero sent assassins to finish what the sea could not. The Senate congratulated him on restoring order. In Rome, murder could wear the mask of virtue. Then came the Great Fire of 64 AD, a blaze that devoured the city for 9 days. Ancient historians divided on the truth. Some said chance, others whispered Nero's hand. As flames consumed the skyline, rumor claimed the emperor stood on his balcony singing of Troy's destruction, his lyre echoing above the screams. Whether true or not, the story became eternal, and when the ashes cooled, Nero seized the cleared land to build his dream, the Domus Aurea, or Golden House, a palace of unimaginable luxury, complete with an artificial lake and a colossal statue of himself towering like a sun god. But glory bought hatred. To silence suspicion, Nero sought scapegoats, the strange new sect called Christians, accused of arson and executed in spectacles of cruelty. Tacitus wrote that some were sewn into animal skins and torn apart by dogs, others burned as human torches to light Nero's gardens. The emperor's art had turned into horror. In his later years, Nero abandoned governance entirely for the stage. He forced Rome's nobles to attend his recitals, performing for hours on end while guards watched for anyone who dozed off. Some senators reportedly faked deaths in their families just to escape another performance. It was said that when Nero sang, no one dared breathe because even silence could be treason. By 68 AD, rebellion rose across the empire. Betrayed by his guards and deserted by the Senate, Nero fled the city he once ruled like a god. Cornered in a villa outside Rome, he ordered a loyal freedman to help him end his life. His last words, chronicled by Suetonius, were chilling. "What an artist dies in me." Thus perished the emperor who turned empire into theatre and theatre into terror. His death ended the Julio-Claudian line, but his legend endured a reminder that in Rome, madness and genius often shared the same laurel crown. Inside the arena, brutality, medicine, and the illusion of glory, the Colosseum, was Rome's heartbeat, a pulsing center of noise, sweat, and sand, where thousands came to forget their hunger and their fear. To the cheering masses, it was a place of entertainment. But for those inside the arena, it was a crucible, a slow dance between life and death performed for the pleasure of the powerful. Before they ever faced the crowd, gladiators spent years within the stone walls of their ludus or training school. Here, every day was a war of endurance. Their mornings began before dawn with weapons drills, mock duels, and endurance marches under the watchful eyes of former champions. The clang of metal, the crack of whips, the groans of pain, it was the music of Rome's machine of spectacle. Their weapons were often wooden for practice, but their punishments were not. Disobedience meant lashes, shackles, or starvation. To survive, one had to learn obedience not out of loyalty, but out of instinct. And yet, despite the discipline, there was an odd sophistication to their world. The Romans were masters of medicine long before the word surgery existed. Gladiator schools employed trained physicians who tended wounds with wine, vinegar, and herbal compresses. The physician, Galen, who later became personal doctor to emperors, learned his craft by treating these fighters. He studied their injuries like puzzles, broken bones, deep cuts, and internal bleeding, turning suffering into science. For Rome, even pain had purpose. To prepare for combat, gladiators ate a peculiar diet. They consumed vast amounts of barley, beans, and ash, a grim mixture meant to thicken the blood and strengthen the body. Modern analysis of gladiator bones confirms this. Their calcium levels were unusually high, making them stockier, heavier, and more resilient. They were not designed for speed. They were built to endure blows that would fell ordinary men. When the day of combat came, the air was electric. Trumpets blared as the fighters marched into the arena, saluting the emperor with the immortal phrase, "Ave Caesar, morituri te salutant, Hail Caesar, those who are about to die salute you. Yet, not all would die. Most bouts ended before a killing blow. The best gladiators were too valuable to waste. The crowd came for drama, not massacre. The real spectacle was in the suspense, the clash of blades, the dance of survival, the moment the emperor's thumb hovered in the air. Weapons varied by class. The retiarius, armed with a trident and net, faced the secutor, a heavy-armed pursuer whose helmet allowed only narrow slits for vision. Their duels were as much theatre as warfare, a fisherman hunting his prey, a predator closing in on a cornered man. The Romans understood narrative. Every pairing told a story, a symbolic struggle that mirrored the empire's own obsession with dominance. When victory came, the survivor stood trembling, drenched in blood and glory. If the crowd chanted Mitte, the defeated might be spared. If they roared Jugula, the victor was commanded to strike the final blow. Yet mercy was not kindness, it was strategy. To grant life kept the drama alive for another day. To grant death reminded the audience who held power over fate. After the games, the bodies were dragged away, the sand raked clean, and incense burned to mask the stench of death. The Colosseum would fall silent until dawn, when Rome's workers would once again fill the seats, eager for blood disguised as beauty. Gladiators lived in that fragile space between reverence and ruin. They were slaves who became heroes, men who found identity in captivity. And perhaps that is the deepest truth of the arena, that in entertaining Rome, they revealed its soul, an empire that worshipped strength but feared mortality, that demanded spectacle to forget the silence of its own conscience. Feasts of excess, the bizarre dining customs of Rome. When the gladiators' cries faded and the arena's sand grew cold, another kind of theatre began, one played not with swords, but with silver spoons. To the Roman elite, dinner was not simply a meal, it was a statement of power, refinement, and decadence. At twilight, their villas would flicker with lamplight, musicians would tune their lyres, and slaves would rush about in silence, preparing the banquet that could last deep into the night. The Romans were obsessed with the art of dining, and their feasts often bordered on madness. Guests reclined on couches, arranged around a low table, leaning on one elbow as servants served course after extravagant course. Sitting upright was considered barbaric civilization. To the Romans, meant eating in a position of leisure, half dreaming as the air filled with perfumes and laughter. The menu was a parade of excess: flamingo tongues, peacock brains, stuffed dormice glazed in honey, and roasted ostrich were the jewels of high society cuisine. Each dish was designed not to nourish but to astonish, to remind everyone present that the host's wealth was beyond imagination. The Roman appetite was endless, and so they invented a way to cheat nature itself. Contrary to popular myth, a vomitorium was not a special room for vomiting, it was an architectural term for exit passages in amphitheaters. Yet the behavior the word has come to represent was real enough. At lavish feasts, guests would deliberately induce vomiting between courses, using feathers or their fingers, so they could continue to eat, without restraint. To consume endlessly was to embody divine abundance. Moderation was for the poor. Even hygiene reflected their extremes. Toothpaste was made from crushed bones, oyster shells, and shockingly urine. Its ammonia content whitened teeth, and Romans imported Portuguese urine as the finest quality cleanser. They brushed their teeth with rags dipped in this pungent mixture, believing the scent of purity mattered more than the taste of it. Conversation flowed like wine, and in Rome there was always more wine. It was usually diluted with water, spices, or honey, for drinking it pure was considered vulgar. Philosophers debated, poets recited verses, and politicians plotted while slaves stood motionless in the shadows, waiting to refill cups or wipe spills before they touched the floor. And if a guest burped loudly after a meal, it wasn't rude, it was praise. A loud belch meant the food had pleased the gods of appetite. For the wealthy, dining was not simply pleasure, it was performance. Some nobles built special dining rooms with retractable ceilings from which flowers or snow would fall upon their guests. Emperor Nero himself once hosted a banquet where the ceiling released a shower of rose petals so heavy that one of his guests suffocated beneath their scent. Every bite, every gesture was theatre, a declaration that in Rome, nothing was too absurd for beauty. But behind the laughter and music lingered a darker truth. While senators reclined on silk cushions, thousands starved in the slums below. The excess of the few was built on the hunger of the many. Rome's banquets were mirrors of its empire, gorgeous, indulgent, and rotting at the core. The people cheered their emperors in the day and envied them by night, their dreams filled with the distant clatter of golden plates. As the final course, a mixture of honeyed fruits, nuts, and spiced wine was cleared away, guests often staggered to the baths or the gardens, drunk on more than alcohol. They were intoxicated by Rome itself, a civilization so powerful it believed even nature could be commanded to serve its pleasure. The feast would end, the lamps would fade, and yet the empire's appetite would remain insatiable, eternal, and always hungry for more. Scandals of the empire, lust, betrayal, and blood in the Roman court. If the Colosseum was where Rome displayed its appetite for blood, the imperial palace was where it feasted on sin. Behind marble columns and silken drapes, the heart of the empire pulsed with corruption. Rome's rulers wielded unimaginable power, but power, when unchecked, often became its own religion. And its priests were madmen. Few names summon such fascination as Caligula, the emperor who turned insanity into policy. His early reign began with promise. The people adored him for his charm and generosity. But the adoration of millions soon twisted into megalomania. Caligula declared himself a living god, demanding temples, sacrifices, and worship in his own name. He was said to hold private conversations with Jupiter, his divine equal, and once built a bridge of ships across the Bay of Baiae just to gallop over the sea, proving that not even Neptune could deny him. But perhaps his strangest act recorded by Suetonius was his devotion to his favorite horse, Incitatus. Caligula fed the stallion gilded oats, gave it a marble stable, and, in a gesture both absurd and terrifying, appointed it a priest. Some accounts even claim he planned to make the horse a senator, a mockery of the Senate that dared whisper against him. His court was a grotesque theatre, where fear was the only script. Nobles who laughed too loudly or not enough could vanish overnight. Their estates became imperial property, their names erased as easily as ink from parchment. If Caligula embodied madness, Empress Messalina represented unrestrained desire. The wife of Emperor Claudius was renowned for her beauty and her scandalous appetites. She was said to host secret contests in the palace brothels, competing with Rome's most infamous courtesans to see who could take the most lovers in a single night. Yet, Messalina's true danger was not lust but ambition. She manipulated senators, arranged assassinations, and plotted her husband's overthrow, all under the cover of charm. Her downfall came when she secretly married another man while Claudius was away. When news reached the emperor, she was executed in her gardens, pleading for mercy that never came. Her story was whispered for centuries as proof that in Rome, pleasure and power were the same poison. And then there were the political banquets, where senators smiled through trembling jaws, never knowing if the next sip of wine would be their last. Poisoning had become an art form. Assassins were disguised as servants, daggers hidden beneath fruit trays. One senator was famously murdered mid-toast when his goblet was switched at the table. The guests continued dining as if nothing had happened. In Rome, death could arrive dressed in gold and perfume. The imperial court was a paradox civilization at its peak, morality at its lowest. While philosophers preached virtue in the forum, emperors enacted farce in their palaces. Lust, deceit, and violence were not the vices of Rome, they were its fuel. To rule was to perform, to survive was to betray. And beneath the splendor of the empire's marble floors, the blood of ambition soaked deep into the stone. As night deepened over the city, torchlight flickered in corridors that had witnessed too much secret lovers' whispers, conspirators' vows, emperors' madness. The empire did not fall in a single blow. It eroded through indulgence, scandal by scandal, feast by feast. And though the dawn always came, Rome never truly awoke from its own intoxication. Gladiators and glory, the making of a Roman superstar. In the heart of the Roman Empire, fame was carved not in marble, but in flesh. Long before the age of athletes, actors, or influencers, the true celebrities of Rome were men of blood and sand gladiators, whose courage, beauty, and strength made them gods among mortals. In a world ruled by emperors, these warriors were living myths, adored by the masses and envied by those in power. A successful gladiator's rise began in obscurity, often as a slave, criminal, or desperate volunteer. Yet through the gates of the ludus, he could step into immortality. Every victory in the arena built his legend, every scar a badge of honor. The Romans worshipped discipline and spectacle, and the gladiator embodied both. Winning a fight was not enough. It was the way one fought, the elegance of a parry, the grace of a final strike that made a man unforgettable. Combat became choreography, and death, if it came, was expected to be beautiful. When a fighter's winning streak grew long enough, he transcended mere survival. His name echoed through taverns, baths, and marketplaces. Graffiti of his likeness appeared on city walls, painted by fans who followed him as obsessively as modern audiences follow stars. Teledus, the Thracian, is the delight of the girls, reads one ancient inscription from Pompeii, scratched in haste by an admirer. Some gladiators had more influence than senators, and in a city where birth determined destiny, that kind of fame was revolutionary. At the height of popularity, these men were invited to the banquets of nobles and even emperors. They were displayed like trophies, their presence both thrilling and scandalous. To dine beside a gladiator was to sit near danger itself, a reminder of mortality wrapped in muscle and charm. Wealthy Roman women, captivated by their raw magnetism, bribed guards for midnight visits to their barracks. It was whispered that the sweat of a victorious gladiator was considered an aphrodisiac. Some women collected it, mixed with oil, as perfume. Desire, in Rome, was never far from the scent of blood. But fame in the arena came at a price. Every triumph only made the next battle more perilous, the crowds more demanding. The more beloved a gladiator became, the greater the risk he faced. Fans craved suspense, not repetition. And so, the men who earned their adoration also earned their doom. Few survived long enough to retire. Those who did were awarded the rudis, a simple wooden sword symbolizing freedom. Some took it and vanished, vanishing into quiet lives beyond the capital. Others refused to leave the sands, addicted to the roar of the people who once saw them as slaves and now called them gods. Even in death, their stories endured. Miniature statues, mosaics, and paintings preserved their likenesses across centuries. Children grew up pretending to be them. Poets wrote verses about their bravery. The Colosseum might have belonged to emperors, but the hearts of Rome belonged to its gladiators. And perhaps this was the empire's greatest paradox, an entire civilization obsessed with the performance of freedom, watching men chained to violence become its greatest heroes. To the Romans, glory was not measured by peace or wisdom, but by the sound of 10,000 voices chanting your name as the dust settled and your sword dripped with victory. When the games ended, the city would sleep under a strange stillness. The crowds dispersed, the torches dimmed, but in the silence, one could almost hear it still, the faint echo of the chant that once shook the stone walls of the Colosseum. The sound of Rome applauding its gods of flesh. Twisted justice, the unbelievable laws that ruled Rome. If gladiators revealed Rome's thirst for spectacle, its laws revealed its soul rigid, ruthless, and astonishingly strange. For an empire that claimed to bring civilization to the world, the Romans often governed with rules that today feel more like satire than justice. Yet every decree, no matter how absurd, reflected the values of a society obsessed with control. The Roman legal system began with noble ambition. It gave birth to concepts that still shape our courts today: contracts, property rights, and the presumption of innocence. But beneath this order lay the iron hand of patriarchy and privilege. The father, or paterfamilias, was the ultimate authority in the household. His power was absolute, extending even to life and death. If a daughter was caught in adultery, Roman law allowed her father to kill both her and her lover on the spot. Such acts were not crimes, they were seen as the natural restoration of honor. In the empire of law, morality was a man's private empire. Marriage, too, was treated as a legal contract rather than a sacred bond. A husband could divorce his wife simply for drinking wine, an act associated with moral weakness and indecency. The reasoning was simple: drunkenness led to disorder, and disorder threatened the Roman ideal of virtue. But the same law that punished women's indulgence excused men's. Senators could hold banquets of excess, drink until dawn, and wake to judge others with impunity. Rome was never equal, not in rights, not in love, and certainly not in law. Even fashion was subject to punishment. The color purple, for instance, was reserved exclusively for the emperor. Its dye, drawn from thousands of crushed sea snails, was rarer than gold. To wear it without permission was an act of treason. One senator's wife was reportedly exiled merely for owning a purple cloak, accused of trying to imitate imperial majesty. In Rome, to appear royal was to invite ruin. The obsession with hierarchy extended to the stage. Actors, musicians, and prostitutes were branded as infamous people without honor. Senators were forbidden to marry actresses, regardless of affection. To share a life with one was to taint one's bloodline, an unforgivable crime in a society that measured dignity by ancestry. Yet the same senators filled their evenings watching those same performers, applauding their art in the theater, before condemning them in the courts. Hypocrisy, in Rome, was not a vice, it was a privilege. Even soldiers, symbols of Roman strength, were bound by strange restrictions. They were forbidden to marry during their service. Love, it was believed, weakened the warrior's resolve. A soldier's loyalty belonged to the emperor, not to a wife or child. And so, legions of men lived for years without families, fathers without heirs, heroes without homes. The empire demanded devotion so total that even affection became treason. Beneath the weight of these laws, Rome sustained an illusion of order. But what the law protected was not justice, it was control. The poor and enslaved suffered brutal punishments for crimes the rich could commit freely. A common thief might be crucified, while a noble caught embezzling could escape with exile and a villa by the sea. For all its sophistication, Roman law was not blind. It saw rank and bowed accordingly. And yet, within this cruelty lay the foundation of modern civilization. The very system that allowed fathers to kill and emperors to exile also gave birth to written codes, structured courts, and the right to appeal, a strange duality that defined Rome itself. It was a civilization caught between wisdom and tyranny, reason and superstition, progress and the primitive. As night fell over the forum, the marble statues of long-dead legislators watched silently, their expressions serene, as if unaware that their noble ideals had become instruments of oppression. The people moved below them, merchants, slaves, soldiers, each bound by the same invisible thread, the law. And though Rome's empire has long turned to dust, its laws echo still, reminding us that justice, in every age, is only as fair as those who command it. Blood and faith, the dark rituals of Rome's emperors. Power in Rome was never just political, it was mystical. To rule an empire that spanned continents, One needed not only legions and laws, but the favor of the gods. For centuries, emperors blurred the line between faith and fear, seeking divine legitimacy through rituals that often dripped with blood. To the Roman mind, the gods were not distant beings of mercy. They were volatile forces that demanded respect, sacrifice, and constant appeasement. And those who wore the purple robe believed themselves their chosen interpreters, half mortal, half divine. Long before Christianity reshaped the empire, Rome's rulers placed immense faith in omens, sacrifices, and celestial signs. Before battles or decrees, priests known as augurs studied the flight of birds or the entrails of slaughtered animals, reading the future in the color of a liver or the pattern of blood. If the signs were unfavorable, armies would delay their campaigns and emperors postponed their public appearances. The fate of nations hung on feathers, stars, and entrails, but as power concentrated in the hands of one man, religion became theater. The emperors didn't just worship the gods, they began to become them. Julius Caesar was declared divine after his death, and Augustus, his successor, subtly encouraged temples to be built in his name. By Nero's time, the illusion of divinity had grown grotesque. Nero surrounded himself with astrologers and mystics, consulting them before every decision. It was said he refused to sign a single decree without checking the stars. Even his performances on stage were timed according to planetary alignments because, to Nero, art was a ritual, and his voice an offering to the heavens. Some emperors, however, went further into the realm of terror. In desperate times, Rome's rulers revived ancient blood rites, believing human sacrifice could restore balance to the empire. During crises, plagues, famines, or military defeats, captives were buried alive or slain in secret ceremonies. Though such acts were publicly denied, Roman historians whispered of emperors who bathed their hands in the blood of victims, calling it purification. These were not common citizens but chosen scapegoats, slaves, prisoners, or foreigners sacrificed to appease divine wrath. Behind the palace walls, religion turned darker still. Initiation rituals borrowed from Eastern cults began to infect the imperial court rites that promised immortality, transformation, and communion with divine forces through pain and ecstasy. The cult of Mithras, worshipped by soldiers, involved symbolic meals of blood and fire in torchlit caves. Emperors like Commodus and Elagabalus joined or imitated such ceremonies, craving the transcendence they offered. Elagabalus, a young ruler barely out of adolescence, merged his Syrian sun god with Roman Jupiter and forced senators to watch as he danced in a golden robe, showering the altar with animal blood. For him, to worship was to rule, and to bleed was to belong. Even the elite feared the growing mysticism of the palace. Astrologers, prophets, and seers became the new courtiers of power. Their prophecies could make or destroy careers. The Emperor Domitian, obsessed with the idea of betrayal, executed countless men simply because astrologers predicted he would die at the hands of one of his own servants. In trying to defy fate, he fulfilled it. And yet, in all this darkness, one truth remained. Religion in Rome was never about faith, it was about control. The rituals unified a fractured empire. They reminded peasants, soldiers, and senators alike that their fate was bound to the emperor's will. When an emperor sacrificed at the altar, he symbolically renewed the covenant between Rome and the cosmos. The people might not love their ruler, but as long as the temples smoked and the omens were read, they believed the gods still favored the empire. As centuries passed, the blood rites faded and the gods fell silent, replaced by crosses and churches. But even then, Rome's instinct to merge power with divinity endured. Every emperor, every pope, every ruler who followed inherited the same shadowed legacy, the belief that authority was sacred and that heaven itself could be persuaded by ceremony and fear. When night descended over the imperial temples and the fires burned low, one could almost imagine the echo of ancient prayers still carried by the wind, the whispers of emperors who thought themselves gods, speaking into eternity, asking the same question that has haunted rulers ever since. Am I chosen or cursed? The games of death, Rome's Colosseum and its horrors. The Colosseum, massive, eternal, and echoing through the ages, stood as the beating heart of the Roman imagination. It was not just a monument of stone and blood, it was the empire itself rendered in architecture. Every tier, every gate, every shadowed corridor whispered the same message, that Rome ruled through spectacle, and that power was best displayed through the control of life and death. To the citizens of the empire, a day at the Colosseum was more than entertainment, it was communion with the divine machinery of dominance. At dawn, as the first light struck the arena's outer arches, tens of thousands of spectators poured into its stands. Senators and noblewomen in silks sat closest to the action, while merchants, soldiers, and beggars filled the upper rows. The emperor presided from his marble box, flanked by guards and courtiers, his presence transforming the games into holy ritual. The air vibrated with anticipation as trumpets blared and the crowd erupted into thunderous chants. To live in Rome was to live for these moments where cruelty became celebration and death a kind of art. The morning sessions began with executions, public punishments that blurred the line between justice and theater. Condemned criminals were paraded before the audience, stripped and humiliated. Some were forced to reenact ancient myths in gruesome form. A man cast as Icarus might be flung from a platform to his death. Another, dressed as Orpheus, would be torn apart by wild beasts. The Romans called it damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts, and lions, leopards, and bears were imported from Africa for this very purpose. The empire's hunger for blood drove entire species to extinction. After the executions came the venationes, the beast hunts. The arena floor would transform into a jungle or desert filled with trees, sand dunes, and even artificial rivers. Hunters, armed with spears and short swords, faced elephants, tigers, or crocodiles in spectacles of danger and daring. Sometimes, the beasts themselves were pitted against one another in cruel experiments of dominance. It was said that Emperor Titus once filled the Colosseum with water and staged a mock naval battle complete with miniature warships and hundreds of men fighting to the death in a flooded amphitheater. The crowd cheered as blood mingled with water, the boundaries between war and performance dissolving completely. By afternoon, the main event began, the gladiatorial games. Trumpets called forth the fighters from the shadowed gates below the stands, their armor gleaming, their faces hard with resolve. The matchups were deliberate. Light versus heavy, speed versus strength, skill versus spectacle. Each fight told a story that mirrored Rome's ideals: discipline, valor, and fate. But the crowd's thirst could turn quickly. They demanded drama, suspense, and finality. When a defeated gladiator fell to his knees, the emperor would rise, hand poised in judgment. The thumb turned up or down, a signal that decided whether a man lived or died. But history suggests the gesture was more complex than legend. A closed fist meant mercy, a pointed thumb meant death, symbolizing a sword thrust. Still, in the eyes of the people, it was the emperor's divine power made visible. The Colosseum devoured lives in numbers almost impossible to fathom. Historians estimate that during its first centuries, hundreds of thousands perished within its walls, humans and animals alike. Yet the audience left each time believing they had witnessed not murder, but order restored. Every death reaffirmed Rome's mastery over chaos. It was propaganda written in flesh, an empire convincing itself that cruelty was civilization. But as the centuries passed, the games grew darker. The scale increased, the brutality intensified, and the meaning faded. Emperors competed to outdo their predecessors: more animals, more prisoners, more ingenious deaths. When Commodus took the arena himself, dressed as Hercules, he slaughtered animals with arrows from a safe distance and executed wounded gladiators pretending to fight back. He demanded the crowd worship him as a god. The spectacle that once unified the empire now revealed its decay. When the Colosseum finally fell silent, centuries later, grass grew where blood once soaked the sand. Pilgrims wandered through its ruins, awed and horrified by its silence. They said it was haunted not by the dead, but by the roar of ghosts, the echo of applause, the sound of humanity's darkest joy. And even now, in the imagination of the world, the Colosseum stands as more than stone. It is a mirror. It reflects what Rome always was, magnificent, monstrous, and unashamed. For in its shadow, the truth becomes inescapable. An empire that worships spectacle must eventually feed upon itself. The baths of pleasure, Rome's obsession with cleanliness and vice. When the noise of the Colosseum faded and the dust of the day settled over the city, Romans sought another kind of ritual, one of warmth, fragrance, and water. The Roman bathhouse was the empire's social sanctuary, a place where rank and status briefly dissolved in steam. Beneath the arching ceilings and mosaicked floors, senators and slaves, merchants and poets gathered not merely to cleanse their bodies but to wash away the weariness of empire. Bathing, for the Romans, was an art. Every major city possessed public bathhouses, some vast as palaces, with gardens, libraries, lecture halls, and theatres under one complex roof. The greatest of all, the baths of Caracalla, could accommodate thousands at once. Heated floors, warm pools, and fragrant oils transformed hygiene into ceremony. The ancient engineers perfected a marvel of architecture. Underground furnaces called hypocausts circulated hot air through hollow floors and walls, turning stone into warmth. Even in winter, Rome glowed with heat drawn from fire and genius. A typical visit began at the apoditerium, the changing room. Slaves guarded the garments of their masters while the bathers stripped, freeing themselves of toga and title alike. From there, the ritual unfolded in a careful progression. First, the tepidarium, a warm chamber to open the pores. Then the caldarium, a chamber of steam and scalding water that loosened the muscles and quieted the mind. And finally, the frigidarium, a plunge into cold water that shocked the senses awake. It was a cycle of purification and renewal, almost spiritual in rhythm. Yet, as with all things Roman, luxury was never far from decadence. Bathhouses were more than places of cleanliness. They were arenas of gossip, politics, and temptation. Senators negotiated treaties beside the pools, generals recruited allies, and poets whispered verses in the mist. Rumors spread faster than steam. Who was favored by the emperor, who had fallen from grace, who was seen slipping into the private chambers of another's wife. The baths were Rome's unofficial parliament of whispers. Mixed bathing was common, and for a time, it shocked even conservative minds. Men and women bathed together, lounging naked or wrapped in thin linen cloths, as attendants rubbed their bodies with oil. The oil itself was later scraped off with a curved metal blade called a strigil, taking dirt and dead skin with it. The ritual was sensual and public, a blend of exhibition and cleansing. For the moralists of the age, the bathhouse symbolized Rome's moral decay. For everyone else, it was simply Rome being Rome, grand, shameless, and alive. Vendors moved among the guests, selling honeyed wine, perfumes, pastries, and dates. Musicians played flutes, while masseurs worked oil into tired limbs. A bather could move from a hot pool to a cold one, from conversation to silence, from philosophy to flirtation, all within a single afternoon. One could spend hours there, emerging only when the sun began to fall behind the rooftops. For a few coins, even the poor could escape the noise of the streets and step into another world, a world where marble shone like dawn and the water carried the illusion of equality. But beneath the laughter and luxury, the baths held another layer of meaning. They reflected Rome's obsession with control over the body, over nature, over decay itself. To bathe daily was to defy time, to renew the illusion of youth. In a city where power was measured by appearance, cleanliness became virtue, and the scent of oil replaced the scent of sweat as the mark of civilization. Yet, like all of Rome's wonders, the baths too had their shadows. The same waters that cleansed the flesh also carried disease. The same luxury that united classes also deepened divides. When the aqueducts that fed the baths began to crumble in the empire's final centuries, so too did Rome's illusion of eternal youth. The marble halls fell silent, their pools dried to dust, and the laughter that once echoed off their vaulted ceilings was replaced by wind and ruin. Even so, the memory lingers. The Roman baths were more than buildings. They were symbols of an empire's belief that beauty could be engineered, that comfort could conquer decay. And in that warm mist, for a fleeting moment, the Romans almost succeeded. Bread and control, how emperors manipulated the masses. If the Colosseum was Rome's stage, the streets were its audience. And to rule that audience, the emperors understood one unshakable truth: control. The people's hunger, and you control their hearts. The Roman Empire mastered not just warfare or engineering, it mastered the art of distraction. Through a delicate balance of generosity and fear, emperors kept millions obedient, entertained, and too busy to question the world around them. The philosopher Juvenal once wrote that the Roman people desired only panem et circenses, bread and circuses, two simple gifts that replaced the burdens of citizenship. As long as the ovens stayed warm and the games continued, rebellion would sleep. It was a formula of genius and cruelty. Feed the body, amuse the mind, and you can own the soul. Every morning, grain shipments arrived from Egypt, the empire's granary. Massive barges carried thousands of tons of wheat up the Tiber River, their arrival celebrated like a holy event. This free grain, distributed to Rome's citizens, was more than charity. It was currency. Emperors used it to buy loyalty. When the grain supply faltered, riots erupted. Starving crowds gathered before the Senate, shouting curses not at the gods, but at the rulers who had failed to fill their stomachs. The emperor's popularity could rise or fall with the weight of a loaf. But food was only the first pillar. The second was spectacle. Public games, festivals, and processions filled the Roman calendar, ensuring that no day went unmarked by entertainment. There were races at the Circus Maximus, beast hunts at the amphitheaters, theatrical performances, and triumphal parades where generals displayed their conquests, parading chained captives through the streets before executing them in front of cheering crowds. It was violence disguised as victory, and the people loved it. In those moments, the empire seemed unbreakable, its citizens united not by justice, but by joy. These events were more than diversions, they were propaganda. Each spectacle reminded Rome's citizens who provided their pleasure. Banners bearing the emperor's name fluttered above every arena, statues of his likeness lined the streets. When he appeared before the crowd, the chants of Ave Caesar were not spontaneous, they were ritual, an act of worship. The emperor was not just a ruler, he was a symbol of divine order, a living promise that Rome's greatness would never fade. Yet beneath the applause lurked an unspoken truth. The empire's generosity was not kindness, it was control. Free grain kept the poor fed, but also dependent. Games kept them entertained, but also distracted. The emperor's power was maintained not through love, but through exhaustion. The people were too busy celebrating to notice their chains. Even punishment became theatre. Public executions and floggings were staged in city squares as lessons to all who watched. The message was clear. Rome was merciful to the obedient and merciless to the defiant. The empire could give you bread today and take your life tomorrow. Fear was the third pillar of Roman rule. Emperors built monuments to awe and armies to enforce silence. Citizens were encouraged to report sedition. Whispers traveled faster than soldiers. A careless joke could end in exile, a drunken insult in death. The Senate existed only in shadow, its members applauding decrees they no longer wrote. The people were taught not to think, but to cheer, to mistake survival for freedom. And yet, the brilliance of Rome's system was undeniable. For centuries, it worked. While other civilizations fractured under revolt or famine, Rome endured through spectacle. Its leaders had discovered the secret of eternal reign: feed the people's hunger and occupy their gaze. Bread and circuses were not policies, they were philosophy. They created a dream of harmony while concealing the truth that the empire's peace was built upon obedience. As the centuries passed, the crowds kept cheering, even as Rome began to crumble. The grain shipments grew smaller, the festivals cheaper, the arenas quieter. But still, the people waited for their bread, their races, their emperor. When the games stopped, when the ovens went cold, only then did they look up and see the ruins around them. The illusion had ended, and the silence that followed was deafening, for in the end, Rome did not fall to foreign armies. First it fell to its own distractions. The empire that conquered the world forgot to conquer itself. Forged in pain, the training and transformation of the gladiator beneath the roar of the Colosseum, deep in the stone corridors where torchlight flickered on damp walls, another kind of battle was fought, a quiet, endless war of endurance. It was here, in the ludus, the gladiator school, that men were remade into instruments of Rome's glory. The sound of steel striking wood echoed like a heartbeat, steady and merciless. Sweat, blood, and fear mixed in the air. Every breath was survival, every scar was education. The training of a gladiator began the moment he entered the gates. There was no ceremony, only submission. His name was taken, his identity erased, replaced by a number or by the name of the master who owned him. For those born free, it was the first death, the death of self. Yet some came willingly, drawn by hunger, desperation, or the faint promise of fame. Whatever their origins, all became equals in the arena of pain. Their days were governed by the doctors, the trainers, former champions who had survived long enough to trade sword for whip. They knew what pain could do to a man, how it broke the weak but sharpened the strong. They demanded perfection in every strike, every movement. The trainees drilled from dawn until exhaustion. Wooden swords honed reflexes without spilling blood. They learned to fight blindfolded, to anticipate a blow by sound, to feel the rhythm of an opponent's breath. Pain was their teacher, and repetition their religion. Their diet, too, was designed not for grace but endurance. Barley, beans, and ash created bodies thick and heavy with strength. They were fed to survive wounds that would kill ordinary men. Archaeologists examining their remains centuries later found bones rich in calcium, proof of the empire's grim efficiency. Rome had found a way to manufacture resilience, but no training could prepare them for the mental battle that awaited. Every night, the trainees lay awake in their cells, listening to the cries of the dying carried in from the arena. Some prayed to forgotten gods, others hardened their hearts, learning to treat fear as fuel. A few broke completely, begging for death before their first match. The lanista, the master of the school, had little use for them. Mercy had no place in Rome's machinery of entertainment. Those who survived learned the discipline of spectacle. They discovered that fighting well was not just about survival, it was about style. To win the crowd was to live another day. A well-timed feint, a defiant roar, a graceful fall could turn an audience's pity into adoration. The arena demanded performance as much as courage. To bleed beautifully was a kind of art. Punishment for disobedience was swift. Whippings, starvation, or confinement in darkness reminded every fighter that their bodies were not their own. Some bore scars not from combat, but from correction. Yet, within that cruelty lay an unspoken code, a strange sense of brotherhood. Gladiators trained together, bled together, and often died side by side. They shared laughter between battles, traded charms for luck, and carved small prayers into the walls of their barracks. To the gods of mercy, let it be quick. When the day of combat finally arrived, They marched from the darkness into blinding sunlight, every muscle taut with the memory of pain. They were not men anymore. They were symbols, flesh sculpted by Rome's will, embodiments of its order, its violence, its splendor. The crowd saw bravery, the empire saw obedience. But within the fighter's heart, beneath the armor and sweat, a quieter truth burned, that even in servitude, they had become something unbreakable. Each strike, each wound, each moment of agony transformed them. They were no longer victims, nor quite heroes, something in between, suspended between life and legend. Their discipline reflected the empire that made them, magnificent, merciless, and bound by ritual. Rome demanded greatness and gave it shape through suffering, and when one finally earned his freedom, the rudis, the wooden sword of release, it was both triumph and tragedy. The weapon symbolized liberation, yet it was carved from the same wood that had trained him. Freedom, in Rome, always came bound to the instruments of its control. In the end, the gladiator's life was a reflection of the empire itself, forged in strength, perfected through cruelty, destined to fall by the same hand that shaped it. For both Rome and her warriors, glory was not eternal, it was fleeting, as fragile as the breath of a dying man in the dust of the arena. As the torches burned low and silence filled the ludus, the echoes of training, the thud of practiced swords, the cries of exhaustion, the distant roar of the crowd faded into eternity. Yet the story of these men endured, immortalized in the stones of the Colosseum and the imagination of history. They were the empire's mirror, its beauty and its brutality intertwined forever.